Every major economic crisis since 1971 has been deliberately managed through secret central bank coordination to systematically devalue labor and savings while protecting asset holders, creating a permanent wealth extraction system disguised as economic stability. Why does your paycheck feel smaller every year, even though the numbers keep going up? You're not imagining it. What if I told you that every economic crisis you've lived through, from the dot-com crash to 2008 to COVID to today, wasn't random chaos but a coordinated wealth transfer? What if the same central banks that claim to protect your purchasing power are actually running a system designed to quietly extract value from your labor and hand it to people who already own everything? You feel it every time you check your bank account, every time you see the grocery bill, every time you realize that same apartment that cost $800 a month 10 years ago now costs $2,000. Every time you watch your parents' generation retire comfortably while you're told you'll need to work until you're 70. That's not inflation. That's not market forces. That's not supply and demand. That's theft with a PhD. And it's happening right now, while economists in suits tell you everything is fine, while politicians promise solutions they'll never deliver, while the wealth gap becomes a wealth canyon, and nobody can explain why in plain language. Until now. Before we go deeper, I need to know this message is spreading. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let me know this isn't just shouting into the void, because what I'm about to show you is the kind of truth that gets buried under technical jargon and academic papers designed to make you feel too stupid to understand. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want the unfiltered truth about how money really works. Not the sanitized textbook version, the ugly, corrupt, documented reality. Let's talk about the biggest scam in modern history. The story starts in 1971, but nobody talks about it because the date doesn't sound dramatic. No bombs dropped, no buildings fell. But on August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. This was called closing the gold window, and it sounds boring until you understand what it actually meant. For the previous 27 years, since the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, the global financial system had operated on a simple principle. The dollar was backed by gold at $35 per ounce, and every other currency was pegged to the dollar. This created discipline. Governments couldn't just print unlimited money because eventually someone would show up asking for the gold. But by 1971, America had printed so many dollars to fund the Vietnam War and domestic spending that foreign countries started getting nervous. France literally sent a warship to New York Harbor to pick up their gold. The jig was up, so Nixon cut the cord. Suddenly, money wasn't backed by anything except trust. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed only by the full faith and credit of the US government. And more importantly, every other currency became fiat by extension. This was the moment everything changed, and most people have no idea it happened. Sound familiar? Today we're told to trust digital systems, trust algorithms, trust central banks managing currency supplies with no physical constraints. Same playbook, bigger scale. Here's what happened next. Without gold backing, central banks could expand money supplies at will, and they did. But they needed a way to coordinate this expansion globally, because if one country printed too much, their currency would crash relative to others. Enter the solution: central bank swap lines. In 1971, the Federal Reserve quietly established currency swap agreements with other major central banks. These are agreements where central banks exchange currencies with each other at predetermined rates, providing liquidity during times of stress. On paper, it sounds like a safety net. In reality, it's the mechanism for coordinated currency devaluation. Here's how it works in simple terms. When the US Federal Reserve wants to bail out the American financial system, they print dollars. But those dollars flood into the global economy, which should weaken the dollar. Except the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, they all coordinate to print their own currencies at the same time. Everyone devalues together, so no single currency crashes relative to the others. Sound familiar? During COVID, central banks globally printed over $10 trillion in coordinated stimulus, all announced within weeks of each other. Same mechanism, same coordination. But here's the part they don't tell you. When they print money, that new money doesn't go to you. It goes into the financial system first. Banks get it, corporations get it, asset holders get it. By the time it trickles down to wages and consumer spending, prices have already risen. You're getting diluted currency to buy inflated goods. You're chasing your own tail. The wealth isn't destroyed. It's transferred. In 1971, the top 1% of Americans held about 30% of the nation's wealth. Today, they hold 35%. Doesn't sound like much, right? But the bottom 50%, in 1971, they held about 4% of wealth. Today, they hold 2%. They've lost half their relative wealth in 50 years. Sound familiar? Every time there's a crisis, we're told everyone suffers equally. But the data shows the opposite. The top gets richer, the bottom gets poorer, and the middle hollows out. Let's fast forward to 2008. The financial crisis hits. Banks are collapsing. Lehman Brothers fails. AIG needs a bailout. The system is imploding. What does the Federal Reserve do? They activate those currency swap lines. On October 13th, 2008, the Fed announced unlimited dollar swap lines with the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of Japan. Unlimited, as in infinite dollars available to foreign central banks to stabilize their banking systems. Between 2007 and 2010, the Federal Reserve lent over $10 trillion through emergency programs. Most Americans know about the $700 billion TARP program because Congress voted on it. What they don't know is the Fed lent $29 trillion through programs that required no congressional approval. Where did that money come from? The Fed created it with keystrokes, digital entries, and a ledger. And where did it go? To banks, to hedge funds, to foreign financial institutions. Meanwhile, American homeowners lost $16 trillion in household wealth. 9 million people lost their homes. Unemployment hit 10%. The Fed printed money to save the system that caused the crisis, but regular people got nothing. No mortgage forgiveness, no debt jubilee, just eviction notices and foreclosure signs. Sound familiar? During COVID, the Fed printed $4 trillion. The stock market hit all-time highs while 40 million people filed for unemployment. Asset holders got richer. Workers got stimulus checks that didn't cover rent. Same mechanism, same outcome, same quiet transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. And the coordination isn't a conspiracy theory. It's documented. Central banks publish meeting minutes. They have regular conferences at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, called the Central Bank of Central Banks. They coordinate policy openly. They just don't advertise it because most people don't understand the implications. Now here's where it gets really dark. And this is the part that should make you question everything you think you know about economic policy. There was a moment in 1994 when someone inside the system tried to expose what was happening. His name was William Greider, a journalist who wrote a book called Secrets of the Temple: How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country. In it, he detailed how the Fed operates with almost no democratic oversight, how it serves the interests of the banking sector over the public, and how its policies systematically benefit creditors over debtors. The book should have sparked outrage. Instead, it was ignored. Why? Because the same year it was published, Alan Greenspan, then chairman of the Federal Reserve, gave a speech to Congress where he essentially said, "Trust us, we're technocrats. This is too complicated for democratic processes. Let the experts handle it." And Congress agreed. But Greenspan wasn't just any technocrat. He had spent decades in private finance. He was a disciple of Ayn Rand. He believed that markets were self-correcting and regulation was harmful. And under his leadership from 1987 to 2006, the Fed embraced deregulation, encouraged financial innovation, and looked the other way, as banks created the derivatives, time bombs that would explode in 2008. Greenspan wasn't incompetent. He was ideological, and his ideology served one group, the creditor class. But the real twist isn't Greenspan, it's what happened after he left. In 2006, Ben Bernanke took over as Fed chair. Bernanke was an academic, a scholar of the Great Depression. He'd written papers on how central banks should respond to financial crises. His whole career was preparation for this moment. And when 2008 hit, he deployed the playbook perfectly. Currency swap lines, quantitative easing, zero interest rates, bailouts disguised as liquidity provisions. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Bernanke didn't invent these tools. He learned them from studying the 1920s and 30s. And the conclusion he drew from the Great Depression was that central banks didn't print enough money fast enough. So in 2008, he printed faster than any central bank in history. $4 trillion in 4 years. And it worked. If your definition of worked is stock prices recovering and banks surviving. But there's someone else who was in the room during these decisions. Someone whose name rarely appears in the mainstream narrative, but who has shaped monetary policy for decades. Someone who moved between academia, the Fed, the Treasury, and the International Monetary Fund, always at the center of power during every crisis. You won't believe the name, and the receipt is wilder than you think. Let me break down exactly how the wealth transfer mechanism works, step by step, because once you see it clearly, you'll recognize it every time it happens. Step 1. Economic crisis begins. It doesn't matter what triggers it. Dot-com bubble bursts. Housing market collapses. Pandemic hits. Energy shock. The trigger is almost irrelevant. Step 2. Asset prices fall. Stocks drop. Real estate drops. Bonds might spike as people flee to safety, but generally, the value of things wealthy people own goes down. Step 3. Central banks activate emergency protocols. This is where the magic happens. The Federal Reserve drops interest rates to zero or near zero. They announce quantitative easing programs, which is a fancy way of saying they print money to buy financial assets. Step 4, coordination with other central banks. The Fed doesn't act alone. Within days or weeks, the European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, Bank of England all announce similar measures. Currency swap lines activate. Everyone prints together. Step 5, money floods into the financial system. Banks get cash. Corporations can borrow at nearly zero interest. Hedge funds and private equity firms get access to cheap credit. Step 6, asset prices recover and then soar. All that new money chases stocks, real estate, bonds. Prices don't just recover, they hit new highs. The S&P 500 after 2008, new record. After COVID, new record. Step 7, the real economy lags. Unemployment stays high for years. Wages stagnate, small businesses close, regular people struggle. But the financial economy is booming. Step 8, inflation hits consumer goods. All that printed money eventually filters through. Food prices rise, energy prices rise, housing prices rise, but wages don't keep pace. Step 9, central banks claim victory. We saved the economy, they say. Look at the stock market. Look at GDP growth. Ignore the fact that GDP growth is measured in the devalued currency they just printed. Step 10, wealth has transferred. Asset holders are richer because they owned things that got bailed out and inflated. Workers are poorer because their labor is paid in devalued currency and they don't own assets. This is the cycle, and it repeats every time. Let me give you the numbers that prove it. In 2008, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was about $900 billion. By 2014, after multiple rounds of quantitative easing, it was $4.5 trillion. That's 4 times larger. Where did that money go? The Fed bought mortgage-backed securities from banks. They bought treasury bonds. They provided emergency loans. But here's the kicker. Those mortgage-backed securities were worth pennies on the dollar in the open market. The Fed bought them at inflated prices, transferring the losses from banks to the public. Effectively, the Fed socialized the losses and privatized the gains, and the coordination was explicit. On October 8, 2008, in an unprecedented move, 6 major central banks simultaneously cut interest rates. The Fed, European Central Bank, Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Swiss National Bank, and Sweden's Riksbank all announced cuts within hours of each other. This wasn't market forces. This was coordination. During COVID, the playbook was even more aggressive. Between March and June 2020, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by $3 trillion. $3 trillion in 3 months. That's faster money printing than any period in American history. They bought everything. Corporate bonds, municipal bonds, exchange-traded funds. They even set up facilities to buy junk bonds, the riskiest corporate debt. Meanwhile, Congress passed stimulus bills that sent checks to households. $1,200, then $600, then $1,400. Sounds like a lot until you realize the Fed was creating trillions for Wall Street while Main Street got crumbs. The result? The wealth of U.S. billionaires increased by $1.8 trillion during the pandemic. $1.8 trillion, while 40 million people lost their jobs. The stock market fell 34% in March 2020 and then recovered to new all-time highs by August. If you owned stocks, you got richer. If you didn't, you got poorer. And here's the mechanism they never explain. When central banks print money and buy assets, they're increasing the money supply without increasing the amount of stuff in the economy. More dollars chasing the same amount of goods means prices rise. That's inflation. But inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. If you own assets, inflation helps you. Your house price goes up, your stock portfolio goes up. Your debt gets easier to pay because you're paying it back with devalued currency. If you don't own assets, inflation destroys you. Your wages buy less, your rent goes up, your grocery bill goes up, you're working harder to tread water. This is regressive monetary policy disguised as economic stimulus. It's a wealth transfer mechanism built into the architecture of the system. And the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks located in Basel, Switzerland, coordinates all of it. They hold meetings every 2 months where the heads of major central banks gather to discuss policy. These meetings aren't secret. They're just not publicized. In 2019, before COVID, the BIS published a paper warning that central banks had become the only game in town and that their policies were creating asset bubbles and inequality. They knew. They documented it. And then when COVID hit, they did it anyway, but bigger. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet today is over $7 trillion. The European Central Bank's is over 8 trillion euros. The Bank of Japan's balance sheet is over 600 trillion yen, which is larger than Japan's entire GDP. Central banks own the markets. When they buy assets, prices go up. When they sell, prices fall. This isn't a free market. It's a managed market. And the management benefits one class of people, those who own assets. But here's the truly insidious part. This system requires continuous expansion. Once you start printing money to prop up asset prices, you can't stop without causing a crash. So they're trapped. They have to keep printing, Keep buying, keep inflating. And every round of printing makes the wealth gap worse. In 1989, the top 1% of Americans held 23% of the wealth. Today, it's 35%. The bottom 50% has gone from 4% to 2%. That's not random. That's systematic. That's the result of monetary policy that deliberately inflates assets while devaluing labor. They call it wealth effect economics. The theory is that if rich people feel richer because their stocks are up, they'll spend more and stimulate the economy. Trickle down through asset inflation. But it doesn't trickle. It pools at the top, and the coordination ensures that no one country can break the cycle. If the U.S. tried to stop printing, the dollar would strengthen relative to other currencies, making U.S. exports expensive and imports cheap, destroying American manufacturing. So they all have to keep printing together. It's a race to the bottom disguised as stability. And the term they use for countries that don't play along? Currency manipulators. If you don't coordinate with the global central banking system, you're labeled a cheater. The irony is suffocating. So here we are in 2026, and the system is more entrenched than ever. Central bank balance sheets are at all-time highs. Asset prices are at all-time highs. Wealth inequality is at levels not seen since the 1920s. And the tools they used to manage the last crisis are still in place, ready to be deployed again. But here's what's different now. The next crisis won't be regional. It won't be contained. The global financial system is more interconnected, more leveraged, more dependent on central bank support than at any point in history. And the coordination that saved the system before might not work next time. Why? Because trust is eroding. Populist movements on the left and right are questioning central bank independence. Countries are exploring alternatives to the dollar. Digital currencies, both private and governmental, are threatening the monopoly of central bank money. The system is built on borrowed time and infinite expansion. But nothing can expand forever. When the next crisis hits, and it will, the wealth transfer will be faster and more complete than anything we've seen. High-frequency trading, digital assets, global capital flows moving at the speed of light. Those who understand what's happening will position themselves accordingly. Those who don't will be left holding worthless currency and mounting debt. This isn't a prediction, it's pattern recognition. Every crisis follows the same script. Asset prices fall, central banks print, assets recover, wealth transfers. Regular people are told they're lucky the system survived. But the lesson nobody wants to learn is that the system isn't designed to serve regular people. It's designed to extract from regular people. Your labor creates value. The money you earn represents that value. But when they print more money, they're diluting the value you created. They're taking a piece of every hour you worked, every product you made, every service you provided, and they're handing that piece to people who create nothing but own everything. This is parasitic finance. This is engineered extraction. This is the 99% lie. You're told you're part of a system that rewards hard work and talent and innovation. But the system is rigged to reward ownership and access to credit and proximity to power. And the biggest lie of all is that this is inevitable, that this is just how economics works, that there's no alternative. There are alternatives. There have always been alternatives. But alternatives require political will and public understanding, and both have been systematically undermined by complexity and jargon and the illusion of expertise. So here's what you need to do. First, share this video. I'm serious. The algorithm will suppress it because it threatens the narrative. The only way this spreads is if you spread it. Send it to everyone you know who's struggling to understand why they're working harder for less. Second, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. This is one story, there are dozens more. The petrodollar system, the IMF and structural adjustment, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the history of bank bailouts. All of it connects. All of it serves the same function. Third, educate yourself, read the primary sources, read the Federal Reserve's own publications, read the Bank for International Settlements reports. They tell you what they're doing. They just use language designed to make you think you're too dumb to understand. You're not too dumb. You're deliberately confused. And finally, ask yourself this question. Are we wiser now, or are we just walking the same path in better suits, with faster computers, with more sophisticated jargon, telling ourselves it's different this time? Because I'll tell you what I think. I think we're standing on the edge of the biggest wealth transfer in human history. I think the next decade will determine whether we live in a society with a functioning middle class or a neo-feudal system, where a small elite owns everything and everyone else rents their existence. And I think the outcome depends on whether enough people wake up to how the game is played. The system needs your compliance. It needs you to believe that economics is too complicated for normal people. It needs you to trust the experts. It needs you to think that inflation is natural and inequality is inevitable. The moment you stop believing those lies is the moment you become dangerous to them. So drop a comment right now. Tell me you see it. Tell me you're done pretending the system is fair. Let me know this message is reaching people who are ready to stop playing along, because they're counting on your silence. They're counting on your exhaustion. They're counting on you being too busy surviving to ask why survival got so expensive. Don't give them that satisfaction. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And remember, the biggest lie isn't that the system is broken. It's that the system is working exactly as designed, and they need you to believe it is broken so you don't ask who it is designed to serve. Stay awake.